All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Workshops 3, our final workshop. This is it. This is it for live event production. Unfortunately, my wonderful co-teaching artist, Melania Espinal, was not able to join us, is not able to join us today. They're feeling under the weather, so the show will go on without them today. But as a quick recap, I know you've seen this a couple times, but just to keep it fresh in the mind, our live event production creative challenge takes a look at the power of working with and creating experiences for community through in-person live event production. So if you haven't already mapped some of this out, some of the things that your showcase, which you'll be submitting at the end of this challenge, can include music, dance, theater and improv, and/or comedy. So in our last workshop, we focused on the first stage of event production, just because concept development and design, which is that first stage, takes a lot of thinking power, a lot of brain power, a lot of wondering and imagining and mapping and planning and really starting to get the sense of what is the event and the concept behind it that you're creating, as well as the design. How is that concept being told through the brand story and the creative direction and etc. So for this workshop, we're going to move into what I call the more intense stuff: the programming, the production, the implementation of your promotion, and then the special day, right? The day of show and your debrief. So we'll get into these into detail, but as a quick recap for what at this point should definitely be completed if you're moving along throughout the process here, is that you need to have your date, time, and location. You need to have your budget, your planning team and volunteers identified, and then your dream list of talent. Ideally, at this stage, not only are these things confirmed, but for example, your team and volunteers and your talent are already in conversation, getting ready for these planning stages. So if this sounds like something brand new, definitely go back to our previous workshop to revisit that. But if not, let's move forward. Planning your event, first production. So I realized as I was working with Melania to think through today's workshop, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about what exactly event production is. We've talked about how to do it, how to conceptualize it, but I wanted to bring us back to our foundation of what is it that we're making here. And so dictionary definition, not really dictionary, but our version of the dictionary, is that event production is the creative implementation of an event concept, which is why we started with concepting in our workshop number 2. So it includes the ideation, aka the thinking, the planning, the logistics, that's like your inner Marie Kondo shining, and then on-site management of all elements necessary to produce a successful event. So the core stages that we're going to focus on within production is programming. So you may have heard of the word programming used in different contexts already. Within event production, programming is the live content of your event. So it's the thing that's happening in front of people, it's being performed. So this can include your host or your MC speeches. It can include your talent performances, your dancers, musicians, etc. Workshops and demonstrations if you're doing more activity-based types of showcases, and/or other presented content. The production is the behind the scenes. It's all the people wearing all black that you don't ever see whenever you go to a concert, a theater performance, etc., because they're running around managing all the things. So this is the production side. And it's where everything within your event actually comes together. So this includes setting up the venue, running your audio and visual equipment, decorating, working with talent and hosts, getting them ready, getting them oriented, troubleshooting, which happens a lot, stage designs, and then any other event technology that's a part of your performance. So I often like to think of behind the scenes as like the Wizard of Oz of every show. You know, they're behind the magical curtain, pushing all the buttons. And then finally, the promotion, which we talked a little bit more about in the previous workshop, is the social presence of your event. So this includes the distribution of your flyers, of your invitations, and any other promotional materials that you've created to let people know, 1, that it's happening, and 2, getting them excited about coming to your event in the first place. So Now that we're actually in the realm of production, there's a couple things that I wanted to really dive into around these production documents that you're going to not only be uploading and working on, but I also just like becoming more familiar with over time. So the first one is your run of show. A run of show is a Q by Q and super hyper, extremely overly detailed document listing the sequence of actions that will happen during your event. Think of it as like a minute by minute of every possible thing that's going to happen, or as close to as a minute as you can get. So I like to call this like the holy grail type of document that keeps your team on track and aligned, and then keeps you and your team on schedule for the event from doors to close. So your run of show typically includes, some folks add more stuff, some folks rework how these things are called, but generally what you will find in a run of show is a call sheet, a schedule, and an assets list. So your call sheet includes contact information, your role and responsibility, the working times for everyone who is working, volunteering, and presenting, performing. So I'll pop into more details around it in a second. The schedule, it has exact, and by exact, I mean to the minute, or as close to the minute as you can possibly get, times of everything that's everything that's happening, the duration of each task and or live content, the responsible party for every single task as listed within the call sheet, and then tasks to do for every moment of the live event. So we'll look at that too. And then your assets list, you can kind of think of this as your all-in-one checklist for, excuse me, for materials, equipment, tools, and any other physical asset that you need for your event. So to dive in a little bit deeper, a call sheet is a document that you send out to everyone who's working at your event, everyone. And the reason this is important is because it outlines their active times, their responsibility, as I mentioned before, and contact information for everyone on site. This is really important because what can often happen, if you're on a smaller show where there's, for example, 2 to 4 people who are working that behind the scenes crew, it's a little bit easier perhaps to stay in touch with each other, answer questions, troubleshoot, send each other updates, etc. But the moment you get on a show that's 5 people and over, you're going to need shared communication systems and easy access to everyone's contact info just in case something happens. Whether you need to get a hold of them, whether you need to get a hold of folks who are related to them, whatever that may be, the call sheet comes in as your guide. So a couple things that you want to make sure your call sheet has or is, one, that it's up to date. Accuracy is 100% critical in keeping your team on time and informed. So what I do typically is, as I get a new person confirmed, like for example, a friend of mine says, hey, Jesse, I can totally do the talent management. I love talking to bands. It'd be so cool to just like get them like set up and prepared and hyped up for the show. I want to be your talent person. I would say, great. I immediately run over to the call sheet and pop in all their info, including their arrival times, etc. Because now I don't have to worry about doing that later. I don't have to worry about whether I forgot to add them and all of that other stuff. Which leads me to the next part here. You want to make sure that your call sheet's completed. You want to make sure that everyone that you've confirmed for a role in your event is reflected in your call sheet and that it's, again, up to date and clear. So if you don't have someone's contact info or role confirmed, follow up with them repeatedly until you have this information. So what I liked to joke in the past is basically my job was a series of following up emails or text messages or phone calls of like, hey, can I still get that thing? Or hey, can I check in with you one more time? Or hello, I didn't receive this. Can you just make sure to send it over and over and over again? For producers, this is something that you want to start to get comfortable with. Producing is a series of follow-ups, and it's okay to ask. So start to flex that muscle now. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you actually send it to everybody. The call sheet, again, has a lot of important information, and you want to make sure that everyone else on your team also has that information. Transparency is 100% key. And then also within event production, our goal is to minimize questions as much as possible. So that way we could maximize our efforts and give ourselves a little bit more brain space. So I'll talk through the other ones here, and then we'll look at all of the sheets together. So the next one here is your event schedule. So as I mentioned before, the schedule is a super detailed timeline of everything that's going to happen, from setup to show ready to event start to doors close. So this includes your task assignments, your audio visual cues, durations, presenting times, etc. You want to make sure that your schedule is not only well planned, but that it also has a couple of other key things here. So one, that it's understood by your team. I'm sure you have experienced this at some point, and if you have not, it's bound to happen very soon, where you're looking at a document or anything and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then the person next to you, you're like, oh, you know, that thing. And then they're looking at it like, actually, I don't get it. And for you, it may be super, super clear. You're like, yeah, of course, that's how it would go. And the words are right there. But not everyone thinks the same way. And not everyone processes information the same way also. If you haven't already come across this, there's concepts around different types of learners. So there's folks, and I don't believe this is a complete list, but there's folks who learn by reading. There's folks who learn by doing, like hands-on people. There's folks who learn by just seeing or like getting visual input, like watching videos. There's folks who learn by demonstration, just like watching someone do it in front of them or like talking them through the process. So everyone's a little bit different, and it's really important to honor that, learn what all the different learning styles are on your team, and then sit down with them to review the schedule with them to make sure that they understand it, and that if they don't, to adjust the information in there so that way it's more clear for them. So for example, something that I started to do with my schedules was that for some visual learners that I worked with, they said, you know what, it's a lot of words. I can't, like, my eye doesn't know how to scan. I get really overwhelmed. It gives me anxiety. I don't really want to look at this schedule. For me, I can't say, well, you have to, even though technically they do because they're a part of the team, but that's not an empathetic response, and that's not a supportive response. Instead, what I started to do was color code my schedule so that way folks could look at it and say like, oh, okay, all of these tasks that are purple are my tasks. All of these tasks that are green are that person's tasks. And it made it easier and more enticing for them to then read it. So you want to make sure they understand it, and you want to adjust as needed to be as supportive as needed for your team. The other thing that you want to make sure is that your schedule is realistic. My favorite rule of thumb is that give yourself more time than you think you need to do the thing, because you're going to very likely need it, especially if it's your first time doing the task or the thing. And even if folks feel super, super confident, like, oh yeah, no, I got that. I can zip that out in 5 minutes. I'm not even worried about it. The reality is that maybe they can, and maybe they will, and maybe they'll do it even faster. But sometimes they might not, because something else could happen. They could have, you know, a sore hand that day. They might have, you know, accidentally caught it in the door, or they might just be a little bit sleepy or a little bit tired and they're going to move a little bit slower, or they might have anxiety and just forget certain parts of the process. So you want to account for that. You want to give people space to do the things in as much time as you think they might need, but also keeping in mind that it could go a little bit faster if they feel really confident or supported in their task. So what I like to do is something that I call buffer. So if a task, like let's say transitioning a stage, transitioning a stage. So I have band A performing for 5 minutes. I have stage like a turnover, and then I have the next band. So if band A is performing for 5 minutes and then I want to turn over, The ideal realm would be like, oh, like let's try and knock it out in 3 minutes. Let's just, get everything down, run up, put the other stuff up, boom, we're ready to perform again. Realistically speaking, that's probably going to be more of a 5 to 7 minute turnaround. And the reason is because you have to maybe set up new cables, you have to help people get off the stage, the crowd might be cheering more, 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 like there might be other things happening, and you want to give yourself the buffer to account for that. And that way, if you do end up moving faster and on schedule, then your buffer now goes all the way to the end of your event versus the beginning. So realistic, it definitely comes into handy. Give yourself way more time than you need. And then lastly, you want to make sure that your event's nicely paced. So I was talking about this a little bit already with changing from one band to the next. But you also want to think of your audience and what they're interested in. So have you ever been to like a show where maybe it's just music the whole way through and the band doesn't talk the entire time? They're just playing, 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 show ends. You might have had a great time listening to the music, but maybe you wanted to hear from the band too. Maybe you wanted to hear some stories or about their life or something like that. Or maybe you wanted a host to come and, just tell you where the restrooms were. That's where you want to think about how you can fold that into your own show and pace it out in a way where you're not cutting the music too short or letting them play for too long, and you're still engaging your audience and making them feel like they're a part of the event versus just receiving the event. I think that that's what makes event productions different than like TV, because for TV, you can sit in front of it and then you just watch. And you get a bunch of information coming into your, your mind around like, oh, whatever it is that I'm watching. But when you're at an event, you can be more active. You can be more a part of the thing that's happening. And it's really nice to pace your show to incorporate that. So try and keep that in mind. As you can see here in the screenshot, you can see a little bit of how there's like more of like a traditional structure. So you have like introductions, 3 performances, and then a closing statement. But you could also mix it up. You could have someone speak in between each band as you're turning the stage over. That's a really common technique that folks use, because one, it gives your stage a little bit more time for folks to set up the new band, but then you're still engaging the audience versus them watching people just run around for like 5 minutes. So lastly, here in your run-up show, you have something that we call your assets list, which I like to say is the final boss of checklists for your event. This is the ultimate checklist of all checklists, of all the things, every single physical item or material that you will need for your event. This includes small stuff like markers and tape to the bigger things like signage and decor, furniture, etc. So some things that you want to make sure that your assets list has is one, triple checked, not double checked, not single checked, triple checked. I would even go a little bit further. I would check it like 4 times, 5 times, 6 times. I would ask other people to look at it and confirm it with me, because what can happen is we are humans. We make mistakes, we forget things. And no one likes the feeling of showing up on this very big special day, forgetting that one important thing at home, and then being like, oh no, what do we do now? So triple check your assets list. Make sure you have everything that you possibly need listed and organized physically as well. So my favorite trick in the book that I used to do is, once I had my assets list triple checked and reviewed with other people who were a core part of the show to like make sure like, okay, yes, oh, we forgot that, or let's add more of that. And once we finalize it, like, okay, this is our final list, no more changes are being made. Once I do that, I then print it out, or you could have it on your phone, and I go and I actually start organizing all of the items if I have them with me personally, or if my other team members have them, then I communicate with all of them to make sure that they're packing up all of those items and that they have them packed, organized, and ready before the night before or several nights before, depending on how many materials you have for your event. You could even go so far as having things packed a week before, 2 weeks, a month, if you're really above and beyond on this. But the goal is to have it all sorted, organized, accounted for, confirmed. So when you wake up that day, this is the last thing you're worrying about. All you're doing is grabbing that box with everything in there that you know 100% you checked, and then you just take it with you and you walk in utter peace. So as a reminder, the next thing that you need to do is send a reminder to anyone bringing an item. If let's say one of your friends said, oh yeah, I have these really cool curtains, we could use them as a backdrop, it would be super fun. Remind them, put it on the assets list, the quantity, the QTY stands for quantity. You would write down the quantity, you would say who the provider is, which would be your friend. And then I would send them several messages, like a week in advance to make sure that they still have it, 3 days in advance to make sure that they still have it, and then the night before to say like, hey, just making sure you have this packed, it's our big day tomorrow, definitely don't want to forget this. And then that way, again, you don't have to worry about it. The last one here is that you want to account for a backup plan, because life happens, and life often happens really gloriously during an event production. And so instead of showing up that day and being like panicking, you want to have, again, buffer, time buffer, materials buffer, etc. So a backup plan for an assets list is, like an example would be if you need just one marker to like maybe write on, I don't know, name tags or signage or what have you, bring 3, bring 5, why not? Items break, they're forgotten, they can get lost, they can suddenly no longer work, the pen could explode, like who knows, right? So just bring more than you need, because even like the worst case scenario is that you don't use it. The best case scenario is that you don't use it. The worst case scenario, you end up needing it, and then there it is right there, ready and waiting for you. So I wanted to go ahead and just quickly, let me just move some things on my computer. I wanted to quickly show you what these spreadsheets look like. This is the document that was uploaded into your folder, your resources folder. So this is what the call sheet looks like. This is a Google Sheets. So I know that sometimes like spreadsheets can look a little bit scary. I personally love spreadsheets, but I know I'm like a nerd and like a little bit, not everyone's about this. So let me try and make it a little bit more friendly. What you can do here is you basically click in to select and then double click to edit. So wherever you see it's highlighted blue, that means it's an editable field, and then you click in. So you would up here type in the name of your event. So it could be like, what did I call it? Locals only lunch for the flyer that I made. Call sheet, I would leave it as is because you want to know which document you're looking at here. And then you could add the date of your event here. So I'll just put in today's date just for demonstration, 22. And that's how you could have your event identified. So that way it's really clear to everyone else what this document is and what date it is. And then down here, I put in a couple of placeholders for the things like the call time, name, pronouns, etc. So you could add it here, like 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., the person's name. I would do whatever name they prefer to be called by, not their like government name, if that's not a name they identify with. Definitely ask folks what their pronouns are, so that way you can approach them when in the way in which they want to be seen. And then lastly, the roles that folks have. So like lead producer, which would be you or someone else on your team. The stage manager, which is the person who oversees the management of bands coming on and off the stage, the props on the stage, things like that. The talent point of contact, which is the person who's working directly with the bands and the host or the MC to, rehearse their scripts or help them find the stage or help them find the restroom, help them get snacks, whatever it is that they need to feel really comfortable and supported to perform. And then whoever's doing your live socials is who I would constitute as like your core like team, you can definitely have way more folks here. These are kind of like the 4 people that you absolutely have to have, but there's way more roles that fill into teams. And if you look at call sheets from like much bigger productions, there's folks that like really start to break down, like for example, within a stage management team, there will be like a stage manager, there will be like at least like 3 to 4 PAs, there'll be someone who just manages like cables, or someone who just manages the board, which is like the sound mixer. So there's so much more that comes into play where people's expertise can really shine. But for now, we're just getting started. So we're keeping it to the core 4. You would pop in their phone number here, and then whatever their email is, if you're using email to send any of these documents to them. And then down here, you would fill out the same information for anyone who's your talent. So like your bands and then your volunteers. Here's the schedule. So here's where you can see the like color coding start to show up here. So again, you would rename your event, add the date, excuse me, right below there. And then something that I like to do is actually list the month, day, and year of whenever certain things are happening, because sometimes they don't happen on the same day. Sometimes they do, and those are really like intense, like, okay, here we go type of shows. But sometimes you get lucky and you can set up the day before or the week before, and then when you show up that day, you're just doing the event. So if you have your production set up separate from your day of show, you could pop in the dates there. And then here's like a couple like suggestions of things that you can do for production setup. So one, a site assessment where you just literally walk the site, you take note of everything, you list what materials you need to set up, any considerations like, oh, maybe we need a longer extension cord here, things like that. And then you go into media preparation. So you can list there like what type of media and technology you'll need to test. So like maybe you have a projector and speakers and a microphone and cables. And how are you going to be testing that? How are you going to be setting that up? Who is responsible for it? That's something that you can start to assess here. A final walkthrough is where you do another pass again. You're ideally doing this with your team, so that way they're fully understanding what the site needs are, the material needs, etc. And then again, we love some buffer time, so there's some buffer time there. For the day of show, you can see basically the same setup here. So setup, show ready, event start, and then event end, and then a depart. And so I'll just quickly talk through these because we have quite a bit of ground to cover today. So for setup, oftentimes, again, like if you're not doing setup the day before or the week before or what have you, some of these like production setup tasks will slide over into this section here. But let's say you can, and that's what this is modeled after, then you would do something a little bit more condensed, right? You would have one to set an arrivals time. I usually reserve, depending on the show, anywhere between 10 to 30 minutes for people to just arrive. Since you're doing this in a school context, this might be closer to like 5 to 10 minutes or 5 to 7 minutes, where you can just all stand in a group together and be like, okay, this is still the plan. Any last minute questions before we go? There's no questions, then boom, next step. Start setting up signage. So I like to do like kind of like a multi-pronged approach here. So you could do signage in key areas near the venue as identified on the map that you'll make. You can start doing your tech setup, either completing it. So if like, again, if you set up the day before, then you're kind of re-plugging things in, make sure they still work. And if you're doing it that day, then you're actually setting it all up. And then program setups, that's usually like decor, furniture, props, backdrops, things like that is when those can start to kind of come in. And I usually try to do those a little bit later after all of the tech and the production materials, just because sometimes you have to move cables or move, I don't know, the projector this way or that way. And so I like to handle the things that are harder to move first versus the things that are easier to move and saving those for last. So show ready is what I call that like wonderful grace period before you open the doors to your event. So show ready gives you time to do any final touches. So this is like, oh, let's add some tape there, or oh, let's adjust the curtain and push it that way type of thing. So you want to give yourself time for that, for you and your team to do those last minute like things that they might have noticed. And then that's also usually when your social media team arrives, where then they can start getting ready to like promote the event, and start telling folks on social media and whatnot. Sometimes event productions will actually have socials arrive at the same time as everyone else for setup, and do more like behind the scenes stuff like, hey, we're setting up, watch us, like join us very soon type of thing. So if you want to do that technique, you most definitely can. And then you go into event start, and this is what I was talking about earlier, where you run through your actual program. And then your event end, where you break everything down. So breakdown usually includes your technology, your signage, your decor, any materials, any other things that you may have put up or set up. Everything gets repackaged and sent back to where it came from. So you definitely want to give yourself time and energy to get through breakdown. And then lastly, here is your assets list. So again, I usually start writing down everything that I need. Provider is who is giving me the thing. For is where is this item going? So for example, it could be like for stage, or for the projector, or what have you. So you can start doing things like that. And then I made a fun little form field where if it's not confirmed yet, like, okay, I for sure need markers. Markers, and then I need 3 because more than we need. The provider, I'll say it's a friend of mine. I'll just say friend name. And then 4, let's just say it's for production team, but maybe it's not confirmed yet, right? Like I don't have the markers yet. I haven't asked anyone for them. I'll leave it as no. But then once I get the markers confirmed, I'll just type in yes. And then now that red is gone. And now I know, okay, only the things that are red are the things that I need to still source. So let's pop back over here because there's more. So next we have, excuse me, your shot list. So speaking of final bosses, here's your final boss for photography and video capture. So this is everything that you want to photograph and get a video clip of before and during your event, and even after if you'd like. Everyone has a different social media strategy, but basically it's a list of what types of shots you want to get, like whether they're close-up shots, wide shots, venue shots, etc. So some things that you want to make sure that it has in like 3 core categories is close-ups. So this is of your host or your MC, of your talent, of your team and volunteers. Like you really want to celebrate your crew, and then your audience enjoying the event, who is also like your core like community here that you're trying to reach through this event. So you want to make sure you get close-ups of them, of like their faces or their heads, or them maybe with their friends, or things like that. You can do things like posed or candid. So pose is kind of like what you do when someone pulls out a camera, you're like, geez. Whereas candid, maybe they're not aware of the camera. They're just talking, laughing, having a good time, watching the show. And you get a couple of those more like natural looking photographs of people in this event environment. The next thing that you can do are wide shots. So this is of your stage, of your venue, of your crowd, of the entire event space, etc. You really want to think of wide shots as like the atmosphere. What is the atmosphere that you created? And you want to document that. You want to show people what it looked like to be in this room from like a slightly more removed perspective. So wide shots really come in handy for something like that. And then lastly, details. You want to get super detailed images of your decor, of your design elements, of your audience's facial expressions or reactions, sometimes even attire if this is more of like a fashion-oriented event, and any other items that you have on site. And the reason detail shots are really important is because maybe in the future, if you're pitching your event to another company in the future, or to a venue or something, you want to show the level of detail that you bring to your events, as well as, again, the atmosphere, aka the wide shots that you're creating, and then people's experiences throughout it. So it really helps you build a full narrative of what that event was like. So let me move this guy. So your shot list is also in that lovely little folder, and it looks something like this. And so this is actually a checklist. So you can actually click it and then it'll strike it out. So there's a couple things in here already of like suggested images and like video capture that you can make, but you can also add more. That's why there's a little other down here. So you can definitely type in some other like images or videos that you want to make sure to capture. And then the shot list is what you give to your social media team. So then that way they can look at it as they're there day of event. They could have it on their phone, it could be printed on paper, whatever works. But that way they have it there. They can look at it and say like, okay, great, check, got that photo, check, got that video, check, got this close up, this wide shot, etc. And then that way at the end of your event, when you're gathering all of this content together, you're not like, oh no, we forgot to take a photo of the band, like now you know for sure you have it. So super, super important to make sure that you review this with your social team and also ask them to contribute ideas. Like oftentimes folks who are really good at social media have a strong sense of what folks want to see, of what folks want to be connected to. Like maybe they have a cool event or a cool video idea, like, oh, we could do, I don't know, a close-up of this and then like a panning of the scene and then maybe a boomerang or something or whatever. So definitely lean into everyone's skills and ideas here and bring them into the fold. It makes your overall production more fun and more unique. So some other things here is we have your sitemap and your production design. So overall, when you're designing your space, there's a lot of things that you want to keep in mind. And it's not just about how pretty you can make it look or how cool or fun or exciting, but there's also really practical things to keep in mind around this, like people's safety and accessibility and, whether the cables are out on display or not. So the way that your event space is designed will make an impact not only on your presenters, because maybe they will now see like, oh, the stage is super clean, there's not cables everywhere, I feel really safe that I'm going to walk up there and not trip. For example, sometimes hosts get nervous, like maybe they're still really good at talking in front of audiences, they're like an extrovert or what have you, but there's still that little moment of like, oh no, I'm going up on stage. And you want to make sure that the only thing they have to worry about is maybe just them feeling comfortable about the words they have to say versus like, am I going to trip? Am I going to fall? Am I going to whatever? So some things to keep in mind. One, be creative. You created this really cool brand for this project, for your event, and you want to use your brand elements to their potential. Think about ways to integrate it into your decor, into your signage, into your announcements, like, things that you say, like if your event has a certain personality, like when we were talking about brand tone and things like that, like let's say your event is more, I don't know, bubbly. Then when you're creating your host script, you want your host to reflect that bubbly type of experience. So that way you're in alignment with the story of your event. The next thing to keep in mind is, and this is also like a lifelong rule, I would say, don't assume. Try to not assume. It happens to me all the time. It happens to everybody, but try with all your might to not assume. If you think something is obvious, think again, it's probably not. So make it super, 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 overly super, extra super to the moon and back, super clear where everything and everyone is supposed to go. Again, we want to minimize questions and maximize our efforts. So try to not assume. And if you are looking at something and you're like, oh yeah, of course, double check it again with someone else on your team to make sure that other people are also understanding this as much as possible. Your audiences as well are likely the last group of people who are going to assume where something is. They literally don't know. They didn't produce this with you. This might be their first time at this venue. They have no idea where anything is or what they're supposed to do. So you want to guide them as much as possible. Lastly, you want to hide and protect the clutter. Bring out your inner Marie Kondo. and make everything look nice, put away and organized, because it has two benefits. One, it looks nice. Two, you avoid safety hazards. So you're no longer opening people up to be tripping over cables or getting your fancy tech that you borrowed stolen or lost. You will then have everything accounted for. And so you want to make sure that you shield any and all of your clutter as much as you can. So you could use tape, you can use rugs, mats, you could use other materials, you could use props. In the past, we've used even plants and flowers. Like, you can use a lot of different materials to hide your clutter. So then that way it's not just out in the open, exposed to either, again, safety hazards or, folks taking it away from you, which is never fun. So as you're thinking about all of this and where do the things go and etc., we create a sitemap. And the sitemap is probably what you think it is, where it's just a visual representation of where everything is supposed to go. So your sitemap must include the stage and performance area, the walkways. The minimum is usually about 3 feet in width for accessibility. You can go up to 6 feet depending on the venue. But at the very, 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 very minimum, 3 feet. So that way folks, for example, if someone's in a wheelchair, they can easily still access the site. You want to mark where the closest restrooms are, the entrances and exits, and then where your audience area is supposed to be. Like, some folks might not know where they're supposed to stand. Is this a stage? Do I stand here? Can I sit here? Am I blocking a walkway? Like, you want to make that really clear. Some other things that you want to consider for your sitemap is the view. Can your audience see the stage? Can they see the talent? Can they see the hosts? Position your talents, your props, and your decor carefully so there's a good view for everyone. Something that I would do is kind of like do the sitemap version. Like, I would bring everything onto the sitemap, and then I would go to the venue and walk around and stand from every single corner to think of like, okay, but from this angle, it's kind of wonky, but from this angle, it's really great. And from this angle, if I put something here, they're not gonna be able to see anymore. And so you start to assess all of that, and you want to plan with that in mind. Which leads to the next thing, placement and positions. You can use black tape to mark the ground for standing areas, for instrument placements and walkways, as well as any other like key things that maybe you want to like mark off. But usually those are the core 3. And the reason you want to have that is because, again, like, let's say your host is coming up onto the stage and they're like, oh, where should I stand? I don't have a microphone. You want to make it really clear for them. So again, they're not accidentally walking off the stage or whatever. So you can do a little black X on the floor and say like, okay, once it's your turn, you come up and you stand there, and then boom, you can go ahead. You can do the same thing for your band, including like where their instruments are supposed to go, like guitar goes here, drums go there. And then again, for walkways, to make it really clear where people are and are not supposed to be standing. Some other things that you want to keep in mind is lighting. If you're indoors, you want to test all the lights that you have. 1, to make sure that they work, but then 2, to see how they actually light the space. Are people able to see the performance? Is it a really dim room? Do you need more lighting? Do you need shade? Do you need to move the position of the stage? You want to keep that in mind, especially if you're doing an outdoor event. I would recommend going out and testing where the sun's angle lands during the time at which your event is supposed to happen. So if your event's at, let's say, 1 p.m. on Thursday, I would go at 1 p.m. on Monday and Tuesday and see like, okay, the sun's angle is about this angle. So if I put the band here, they're very well lit. But let's say if I adjust the stage this way, now it's getting them on the side and they might look weird in the photos, whatever. Like, these are things that you want to keep in mind as you're creating your site. And then the last one here is, as I mentioned before, your entrances, your exit, your restrooms, and your audience area. So you can also use leverage and clear markings to the best of your ability to guide your guests and presenters around. And honestly, there's in my belief, I don't think there's a thing as too much signage, because again, your audience is often walking in not knowing what they're expected to do in this space. And so the more you help them, the more at ease they feel. So give them more information that than they need. Again, you're starting to see a pattern here. So this is actually a very real site map that was used for a past event that I was a part of. And so you can see here, we have a very, very simple approach to a sitemap. There's no fancy drawings. There's no no architect renderings, whatever. We do have a blueprint of the space that was provided to us by the venue. But other than that, we're just using colored boxes with, typing in where things are supposed to go and then just dragging them around and placing them into the map. So I wanted to show you this so that way you can see how you can approach it for yourself. And then to bring up this slide here, this is the sitemap Canva template that was linked in the previous slide. And to show you, you could click on elements here. Here's the lines and shapes. Here's a little, page is locked. Forgot to log in. Cool. So what you can do here is just click on a box like this, drag it into the sitemap space, and then start typing in whatever those elements are to make it look like your version of, or your venue's version of this. So definitely feel free to pop around into Canva and start building those out. And then again, reviewing them with your team too. So, here we go. So some other things that you can keep in mind here is around your production design. So you want to be resourceful, you want to be green, you want to get inspired, and you want to keep it safe. You could look at sites like TikTok and Pinterest and Instagram to find that type of inspiration. And, just like some things to keep in mind is like, think about how to make it low cost and easily crafted. Think about how you could make it environmentally friendly. Like you could source locally, like reduced waste. You could recycle where you can. You could look at how other venues or spaces have done this. And lastly, you want to keep it safe. You want to avoid flammable, easily breakable, or unusable materials. So if someone's like, oh, I really want to have this glass sculpture, is there a plan for how to keep that glass sculpture safe? What happens if it falls? What happens if it falls into the audience or into the walkway? You want to reduce those types of hazards so that way you're not opening yourself up, your audience, your team, etc., to danger. So some other things that you want to keep in mind here is around accessibility. So disability is something that you want to factor into every single production that you do. And it's something that event producers overall are still developing as a practice. I think from things that I have read and folks that I have spoken to who identify with disabled experiences, folks are still not doing enough to account for disability, especially in event productions. So the way that disability is defined is the smart rule of thumb is that don't assume that any of your attendees don't or do have a disability. Your event should do its best to accommodate a wide range of abilities, and knowing that you likely won't be able to accommodate them all. And that's something that you will develop or continue to grow on and develop and learn with over time. But that said, oftentimes the disabilities are defined as one who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major lifestyle activities, one with a record of impairment, even if he, she, or they isn't currently disabled, and then one who is regarded by others as having a disability, like someone with severe facial scarring. So you want to be really mindful throughout your event and how you can best accommodate folks who have disabilities. And here's a quick checklist. We're running a little bit close on time. I've been talking too much. So I'm going to breeze through these, but you do have access to these slides and this presentation. So definitely feel free to come back and revisit this. But some key things to keep in mind is to make your event promotions as accessible as possible. So things like written descriptions, transcripts, or captions, high contrast. You want to have a detailed accessibility information about your event. So are there steps, ramps, elevators, walkways? How wide are they? This is where your sitemap comes in. Where are the restrooms? Are there chairs or space for wheelchairs available, and how many? Some other things for on-site accessibility, like training your volunteers to support attendees with disability needs, to use your words. Don't touch people without their explicit permission or request. You know, you always want to ask if folks need help, and then if so, what type of help they are seeking. Use tons of signage. We love signage. And create clear pathways and walkways. You also want to be super mindful of triggers. So you don't want to use flashing lights or strobes during performances. Or if you are using those, then you need to provide that information at the very beginning of your promotion, so that way folks who are affected by those, like those who experience epilepsy, can respectfully not attend your event, because that can trigger them. You don't want to use harmful racist, sexist, or ableist language. And then you want to ask again, if someone needs support, don't assume. Assuming is not fun. So as a recap here for your distribution strategy, some things that you can use, again, as a reminder from a social media standpoint, are Instagram posts, stories, and reels. Instagram just launched a notes feature, so that's something that you can look into too. TikTok for some of your video promo. And then you could even tap into like a Be Real, for example, to include behind the scenes or teasers as you're working up to your event day. These again must be public facing, not personal accounts. And then for physical and in-person, direct invites, printed posters, signs, flyers, stickers, buttons, and other fun little printed things that you can make to promote your event. So for your day of event, some things that you want to make sure you bring are extra copies of your production documents, including items on your assets list. You want to save it on your phone and print it, because sometimes our phones lose power. Speaking of, you want to bring extra batteries, charging cables, extension cords, and power strips, because technology loses power unless it's plugged in. So bring things that you could plug it into in case it happens to lose power that day. You want to bring water bottle and snacks. We don't want to be hangry. We want to be hydrated. We want to be fed, happy, and focused. You want to bring comfortable shoes and clothes, because it might get too hot, it might get too cold, and you want to make sure that you feel comfortable, because the more physically comfortable you feel, the better you can be when you're there and with your team. And then you want to bring good vibes. Your team, your talent, and your attendees are counting on you. So do whatever you need to do to stay positive, resourceful, and solution-oriented. Event producing can be kind of intense. It can, you know, make you anxious. It can make you fearful. It can just make you feel like stressed out or whatever. And that's real, and that's okay. But this is also an opportunity to learn how to take care of yourself and your team, so that way everyone's arriving in the best spirit they possibly can. So definitely keep that in mind. So in terms of on-site communication, some things that you can use to leverage like active communication during the actual event are things like Discord, where you can create different channels for different teams, like talent, volunteers, your core team, etc. Or you could do group texts, where you could just bring everyone into like a group chat on your phone. And if you have an iPhone, you could even name your threads and put a little emoji in there if you want. But the number one thing to remember is that you want to onboard all of your different teams and talent onto whatever thread you're using, whether it's Discord, group text, or another chat type feature, like before the event date, and make sure they're 100% familiar with your on-site communications plan. So don't do it the day of, like, hey, by the way, you're in this new group chat, because folks might be a little bit confused and they might not know, and the mental habit might not be built in yet. So you want to make sure that you account for that and give people space to get onboarded. Some other things with events, it's troubleshooting. So lovingly, life does not always go according to plan. Being a planning person, that's like the funniest thing ever. And that's why you need to have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, a plan E, F, G, H, I, J, K, for as many scenarios as you can. So the way that I like to say this is the one time that having anxiety about everything going wrong works out, because you actually want to imagine everything going wrong. Where could all the things go wrong? And then after you've imagined it and given yourself like a mini existential crisis, then you come back to Earth and you start planning for potential solutions to either prevent it or to mitigate it if it happens, right? And so this is really, really important because you can leverage this with your team. So then that way, when your event comes and let's say one of those things does go wrong, you already have a plan and a solution potentially in place. This is what we call contingency plans, and they're super, super important. So some things that you can keep in mind when troubleshooting scenarios is one, own the error. Even if it's not your fault, even if you didn't do it, as a producer, it is your responsibility. So own it with grace, own it with joy, because that gives you the inner power to then move towards a solution versus falling into the traps of guilt and shame and sadness and whatnot. Like, we don't want that. That doesn't make anyone feel good. So let's just own it. Okay, a mistake was made. Let's find a solution. So the next one here is be receptive to ideas. Ask your team to troubleshoot with you. Not every idea is going to be great, I'm not going to lie. And not every idea will be terrible either. Some ideas might be, as I've learned, mid. But regardless, you want to be receptive to any and every idea, because sometimes they'll grow on each other, they'll feed on each other, and then you might come up with a really cool one. You can also activate multiple solutions at once. So if you have a super time sensitive scenario, and this was my favorite option to use, and let's say you have plan B, C, and D outlined, you could implement them at the same time. So if I have a problem and I have 3 people to troubleshoot the problem with me, then I'll say, person A, you go do this, person B, you do that, person C, you do that. And then whoever comes back first, it's like a relay race. Whoever comes back first with an option that works, that's what we're doing, and we're moving on. You don't want to spend too much time unless it's a much bigger issue. In that case, then you kind of do. But oftentimes they're much smaller fires. So implement them all at once, move with the solution that works, and then keep on going with your show, which leans into the last one here. Get a runner. This is really, really important, where someone's sole responsibility is literally to go run and get the thing that you need to fix the problem at hand. And if you can't find someone to do just this one role, then find someone on your team who has that flexibility to step away from their task, because maybe it's not as intensive or as focused, where they can double as a runner. So lastly here is debriefing. After your event, it's really important to sit back together, reflect, and do your next steps. Excuse me. So congratulations, you wrapped up your event. Now what? Here are some things to do right away within 2 to 7 days after your event is over. Edit and post the photos. Edit and post the recap video or videos. Maybe you made a couple. Send an email or text message thanking everybody on your team. This is your team, your volunteers, your host, your talent. Gratitude is something we all could use a little bit more of in our lives. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel appreciated. And it's good to offer that back to the people who have supported you and your vision in making this event happen. Say thank you. Return, recycle, or reorganize any materials that you used during the event, and then do something nice for yourself. You did so much, you deserve it. You're probably sleepy and hungry and tired and your feet hurt. And maybe you got a new pimple. I used to always get a little pimple like up here after each event. So give yourself a break, celebrate yourself, and then get ready to debrief. Debrief is probably my favorite time of an event, because it's the process of reflecting on it, of sitting back and thinking, okay, so how did that go really? So you can start debriefing during the event, where you could start to walk around and take notes of what's happening as it's happening, and say like, oh, maybe next time we'll put the chairs over there, type of thing. But then after your event is over, you want to gather with your team after you give them some time to rest. Don't do this right away after your event. Wait like a couple days, a week. I used to wait 2 weeks just to give people a lot of time and space. But you want to meet with them and set some community agreements around, meeting with honesty, with mindfulness, with appreciation, solutions, and new ideas as you're talking about what actually happened during the event. You want to create a space where folks feel safe to share their insights, but also feel supported to find new ideas and solutions. So this is where your debrief report comes in. So in this document, which you have in your folder as well, there's only 3 core questions. What went well? what challenges did we face? Where can we grow or change? If you want to add more questions, you can, but you only really in life and ever need to answer these 3 questions. And again, answer them with the community agreements that we mentioned earlier, because that will give you the insight to then create your next event with all of this learning and growth in mind. So as a quick recap here for your production materials that you'll be submitting, it'll be your run of show. So it was that worksheet that I showed you, which includes your call sheet, schedule, and assets list, the site map that you create in Canva, and then your debrief report, because I really want to see how you learned, how you reflected on this entire process and experience, and how that can guide you into the next event that you decide to do. Some of the other materials that we talked about, like the shot list, the production design mood boards, accessibility event checklist, that's just for you. That's just for you to have as a resource and as a tool for growth, but don't worry about submitting those. So with all that, thank you so much for joining. I'm really, really excited to see the productions that you all make, and hopefully this was helpful.